passed it, and we know that this menace is there, pass it. There are a number of states that already have the death penalty for kidnapping, and some state governors have already said that, look, if any persons are convicted on account of their participation in kidnapping, that they would readily sign the death warrant. There's been some reluctance on the part of some state governors to sign the death warrant. So, because if a person is sentenced to death for that,
Because the issue is how many states are doing this. If it's not a federal...
That's why I say, those legislatures that haven't done it, encourage them to do it.
If it's not a federal offense, how do you account for even foreigners that are kidnapped in this country? So if it's not a federal offense, I am thinking that all those state legislations may not be as effective as it should be if it's not of federal concern, because foreigners are also kidnapped in this country.
Yeah, well, the way it functions, there's a criminal code. The criminal code applies at the state level. There's also the penal code, which applies in the northern parts of the country. So it's a state law. It's just all these issues that you can find them. Actually, you can, for any prosecutor, you can actually go to the appropriate sections of the criminal code and the criminal procedure law or the criminal procedure code to put these persons on trial. The kidnapping has always been an offense in the first instance, but now if it also occasions death, then of course there's a count for murder. But I get the point that, look, this is a major national crisis, and it would therefore require that the lawmakers and the various states, in my opinion, should be up on this particular issue. Kieran, you have other people. Let me return to the Daily Trust.
Daily Trust, okay.
Daily Trust newspaper has a story. This is why are entrusted Nigerian treasury with women? That's according to President Buhari. I think there should be why are entrusted Nigerian women why are entrusted Nigerian women with Nigerian treasury, yes, why I entrusted Nigerian treasury to women, President Buhari. But of course, it just says the confidence that he has in women as managers of the nation's treasury. UTME, no cutoff marks yet, JAM says. That's on page 3. And a kicker there, NCC, Nigeria ready for 5G technology. How well have we managed 4G in the first instance? Others are still, we have service providers who are still lagging at 3G. Okay, now, lead story, what we are doing about Abacha's $300 million, and this is according to the federal government, says money not to be shared with the U.S. and Jersey. If you recall, Bayo, we discussed this yesterday. You discussed this yesterday. 211 million pounds. This number already be converted now to 300 million US dollars, 82 billion naira. Still more alerts, are coming from the loot of well over 20 years ago. Now, the other headlines right at the foot of the front page of the Daily Trust newspaper: primary school teachers may retire at 65. That's page 3. Salah, Ganduje counsels Hawan Nasarawa, page 4. Experts want national carrier established before year end.
Well, JAM has put up an announcement to clarify that it has not provided any cutoff mark for UTME for 2019. In fact, they are supposed to have a meeting at Bogan. It's after the meeting in Bogan in Osun State that they will make announcement. I'm talking about women. I think it was a delegation that visited the president, and they were asking for affirmative action. The president retorted that, if you observe, I have entrusted the treasury to women, and that is because they are better managers, because women manages resources better in the households, in the towns, and in the country. But however, if they are playing over twist and asking for more, he will see how he will consider that. Meanwhile, today, the 8th National Assembly, which began on June 9th, may likely be winding down. This is ahead of official inauguration for the 9th Assembly next Tuesday. The valedictory sessions are supposed to start today about 10 o'clock. The clerk of the House put up an announcement, that is P.W. Giwa, that the session will begin 10 o'clock today. There is this confusion about local government autonomy. NFIU has not granted local government autonomy. What he issued are financial kind of guidelines about how funds deduction from the local government can be gone about. There's been this misinterpretation. Even some governors have taken it up and said the action of NFIU is illegal because it's trampling on them. NFIU is not giving local government autonomy. They have provided guidelines for how the finances
guidelines
can be dispersed.
Those guidelines are tilting towards financial autonomy of local government. And that is why the governors see, what is autonomy? If you cannot operate your finances, money allocated to you, right, as head of any institution. So that's why the governors are saying no to that, because they still want to cling to the usual and the normal way they have been, distributing monies meant for local government for other projects in the state. That's why they're shouting. Otherwise, why didn't they just keep cool? This is just guidelines. These guidelines are...
In public service, there is financial guidelines, how you go about expending public money. And if exigencies arise, the agencies that have a responsibility, the Financial Intelligence Unit, have a responsibility about money laundering. And it is not only peculiar to Nigeria. There is an international circuit. And therefore, they are putting some of these measures down to check money laundering. And therefore, it is part of the financial regulations that they have to adhere to. Already, Nolge has welcomed it because it will enhance the rapidity and the resource availability for local government.
Exactly.
But strictly, it is, as Bayo said, it is not financial autonomy. We discussed it on Good Morning Nigeria, I think on 2 occasions or so. But the guidelines relate to cash withdrawals, for instance, on a daily basis, not more than 500,000. And that the e-transactions will also now have to be encouraged, or checks, so that they can be traced. If you say you have done X, Y, Z, the point that Kieran also made is important, because what we do here is that, local governments are under instructions, or under directives, to spend money on projects that they know virtually nothing about.
Until this moment, no governor has come out to say, look, this is the reason why they're kicking against that. Nobody has said anything, because they have been feasting on monies meant for local government areas for so many years now. So they're used to it. All right, now let's go.
Can I draw attention to this human interest story? Doctors spent 4 hours to operate on a man. He found in his stomach a knife, 8 spoons, a screwdriver, toothbrush, and others. The doctors say the 35-year-old man was believed to suffer from a psychiatric disorder, which compels eating non-edible items. They spent 4 hours. X-ray showed that the spoons and the knife were actually protruding through the belly, and they quickly had to rush him to the operation table. The man is safe, and the ailment is called pica. It is a disorder for, let's call it psychosis.
Where did this happen?
Huh?
Where?
In India.
All right, let's go to the editorial for today. To the editorial for this morning is taken from Tribune. Nigerian Tribune is on page 13. Paying parents for children's education. Recently, the UNICEF, under the Educate a Child cash transfer program, gave money to 7,342 parents of out-of-school children in Kebbi State to facilitate their children's education. Why, for instance, is that no parent in some parts of the country needs to be induced financially before sending their children to school.
Well, the editorial is saying that this, rather than being an incentive, it is a disincentive. And the editorial is saying that out-of-school children in 2014 was 10.5 million and has increased by 2019 to about 17.2 million. And therefore, if you have to give incentive for parents to go to, for their children to go to school, will you continue to do the same thing when they are in secondary school? But there are the positive sides of it. They have an increase in enrollment, and also the money paid to parents, about 8,000 naira paid to the parents, have enhanced the financial power of the mothers of the school children, and are encouraging them to go to school. But they are saying that that cannot be sustained.
All right, it's on that note, Bayo Twebe would like to thank you for being around. We'll see you again tomorrow. Thank you. Okay, it's Good Morning Nigeria still. We're taking a short break now. When we return, we'll get ahead with our principal item for discussion this morning, which is on still 20 years of democracy, but today we're looking at the electoral process.
Turn up to more music, comedy, dance, and more. The Republic, featuring an array of Nigeria's finest. One day called Rema, Psycho YP, Fireboy DML, Classic, Tempo, and other surprise performances. Host Sheila and Judge the General. Date June 9th, 2019. Venue International Conference Center, Abuja. Red carpet 4 p.m. Main show 6 p.m. For inquiries, call 081-0302-9457. The Republic, brought to you by Edgemax Media, supported by OSGF, Sosa, Vidi La Vida, Dre and iBlend, Moscow, Eventi, and Hennessy. The Republic, turn up!
This event is part of the activities lined up for the celebration of Democracy Day 2019.
They are there at the crack of dawn. They are there busy preparing while we rise for our day. They are there silently, guarding, waiting, listening, and watching. They are there ready in the sky above and the waters below, in the blistering heat of the day, in the dead of night, willing, indefatigable, determined in the defense of the sovereignty of our country. They are our first line of defense and our last. They who have paid the ultimate price in defending us. They are fathers and uncles. They are mothers and sisters and girlfriends and boyfriends. They are brothers and cousins and best friends and neighbors. They are classmates, colleagues, and citizens of this nation. They are our defenders and deserve our respect, our prayers, our thoughts. Nigeria, please support our armed forces.
Television studio lighting requires skills which can only be acquired through professional training. NTA TV College JOS therefore invites engineers and technical officers in public and private television stations to a special 4-week course on television studio lighting. Date 10th June to 5th July 2019. Course fee 100,000 naira only per participant. Accommodation fees inclusive. Venue NTA TV College, Rayfield, JOS. The course will expose participants to modern techniques and technologies of television studio lighting, operation of studio lighting equipment, and the profound effect of lighting on television broadcast. For more enquiries, please call 0803-314-4383 or 0806-980-9807. NTA TV College, training you to be the best you want to be.
Well, if you just joined us, this is Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the NTA, your breakfast show. And today we are taking a look at the electoral process within the last 20 years of democracy in Nigeria. And of course, to kickstart it will be a background put together by Oyemi Ajayi.
Recognized in 1999 as the watershed of Nigeria's democracy cannot be complete without giving credence to the electoral umpire and the process. Nigeria runs a presidential system of government and bicameral National Assembly, the House of Representatives, and the Senate chambers. So far, the country has had 6 elections in 1999, 2003, 2007, 2011, 2015, and 2019. In 1999, Nigeria had 3 political parties: Alliance for Democracy (AD), the All People's Party (APP), and the People's Democratic Party (PDP), where Olusegun Obasanjo of the PDP emerged as president of the country. Elections in Nigeria have been subjected to criticisms, especially on matters of electoral violence, ballot snatching, multiple thumb printing, result manipulation, and many more. Analysts are of the opinion that the 2007 election that ushered in the then late President Umaru Musa Yar'Adua was marred with irregularities. This was even condemned by the late president with the promise of reforming the electoral process that necessitated the inauguration of the Electoral Reform Committee in getting the process right. Subsequently, series of electoral reforms and amendments were made, among which are stopping the funding of political parties, the introduction of card readers, and the increase in political parties' participation in the election, amongst others. Interestingly, the 2015 election was widely adjudged to be credible and transparent, and this saw an incumbent president, Goodluck Ebele Jonathan, defeated by President Muhammadu Buhari, but a feat commended both locally and internationally, and also others who believe that at last Nigeria has got it right with our electoral system. In 2019, 73 political parties participated in the elections, and to many, this was quite fair. It is also widely held that one interesting part of the electoral amendment was the Not Too Young to Run bill, which gave room for young people to contest elections. Also, age limits of contestants were reduced to allow more youths to be involved in governance.
All right, so Emi Ajayi, thank you very much there for that backgrounder. We, of course, have two guests with us in the studios, very familiar guests on Good Morning Nigeria whenever we're discussing issues around elections and politics. First, let's welcome Sam Egu. Sam Egu is a professor of political science and currently the resident electoral commissioner for the Independent National Electoral Commission in Niger State. Professor Sam Egu, pleasure to have you with us again on Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you very much.
Also here with us in the studios is Ezenwa Nwagu. Ezenwa Nwagu is Chairman Partners for Electoral Reforms. Ezenwa, delighted to have you with us on the program.
Thank you.
Good morning.
All right, Kiran. Yes.
You're welcome. These are two gentlemen that have been involved in the electoral process for a while now. So very much armed with information concerning the process. Let's start this way, looking at democracy in Nigeria 20 years after. Well, when we started, we were making reference to nation's nascent democracy and what have you. Now, what should be the age of political maturity when we begin to move away from nascent level to a matured level? I'd like to start with Egu.
Well, I think if you reflect on the history of democracy itself, right from the 18th century, in Europe and then across the globe, there's something that is very constant, and that is that democracy is a long haul. It's a journey that, is really not a destination. It's a journey. And what that means is that you don't have a point where you say a democracy has fully matured. It's about constant struggle of the people to improve the process and to increase the transparency of the process of citizens electing their leaders. So you cannot say after 20 years it ought to have matured, because there are many factors that determine the maturity of democracy. You are talking about the strength of the institutions. You are talking about the behavior of the actors. You are talking about the environment in which elections take place. And all of them contribute, to the integrity of that process. So instead of saying that democracy has matured or ought to have matured at a particular point, you begin to talk about whether there is improvement in the integrity of that process. And election is just one aspect of that whole experience. Election is a procedural, means through which people elect their leaders. But the greater task of democracy is the level of accountability of the states, of elected leaders, and of public institutions to citizens. The level at which citizens are able to hold their leaders to account. So democracy is a very big movement. Election is just one part of it. So we need to therefore understand democracy as a constant struggle, of people to build strong institutions that are resilient, of citizens that also have imbibed democratic culture, the culture of selecting their leaders, the culture of people winning, the culture of people accepting that they have lost, but in the end, that we are able to use elections as instruments of enforcing political accountability, so that if after 4 or 5 years, depending on the tenure of elected people, people are able to remove leaders that are bad, then democracy and elections are providing that promissory note, namely that you reward those who have done well and you punish those who haven't done well. So we need to therefore think about what kind of political parties are you dealing with, and so on and so forth.
All right, thank you. Well, you've got experience over the years when it comes to Nigerian politics, with a special emphasis on election. But I also like you to touch on the question I put to Egu with respect to how matured are we, given some indicators, which of course Professor Egu has, raised. Are we matured? Are we really, what is the journey? Is the journey a good journey so far, 20 years after?
I thank you. I'm really worried that you want to pitch me against my teacher. He has told you that it is a process that that you can't say is maturing, but we would have to interrogate perhaps and look at the intrinsic values of freedom, of transparency, of accountability, of questioning, which is for me, the much more stronger value, the ability to interrogate, the ability to question. And I think there has been incremental ability to do that, if you ask me. Doors are being knocked at, sometimes they are not opening those doors. People, they keep pushing. But if you ask me whether it's been a good one, I would say it's a mixed bag. Because most times journeys don't go very, it could have potholes, it could have challenges, but what is important is the determination. And I think for these 20 years, we've seen progress, we've seen regression, if you like, but all in all, we are determined people, and the institutions are also beginning to respond to the fact that we are civilianizing our language. You are gradually seeing the easing off of immediate effects, understanding that this is a process-driven thing. Democracy is about a process. So if I want to get information, there are mechanisms that were not there before through which I can now get information from public officers, something called a Freedom of Information Act, which didn't exist, before now. So I could write letters. If they don't respond, I ask again. And if they refuse to, I take them to courts, and the courts begin to pronounce on those issues. So for me, it's to say that if you look at our democracy, I'll just say we are transiting. But I also think that we have used where we are as a point of holding down ourselves. If you remember from 1999, if you push, they say, look, we are just transiting. This nascent democracy. If by 2003, anything you say, they say, we are just, this is the first time we are transiting from civilian to, so what needs to happen is that we need to shake off all of those things that hold us down and understand that we have been presented with instruments through which citizen engagement can be more robust, can be more fundamental. And then if you look at also the issues that democracy provides at the National Assembly, at the legislature, you see more interaction between civil society and the legislature at the national level. That may not be very strong at the subnational level, but you are seeing opening up of spaces, questionings, and I think that is the value that this democracy brings for us.
All right, gentlemen, thank you there for your opening statements. I'd like to return to Professor Sam Egu, and of course the question will be taken up also by Ezenwa Nwago. Prof, what is the centrality of elections to democracy? And beyond being an event, what are the core ingredients of a credible election?
Well, I think this is one area where a lot has been said. So it's not really an area where you need to have a lot of debates. To begin with, the whole idea of democracy is that sovereignty belongs to the people. And therefore, unlike the era where monarchs and kings held sway and ruled society on the basis of whims and caprices, we now have a situation in which people have the opportunity to elect their leaders in an atmosphere of freedom, where they have opportunity to choose between alternatives represented by political parties and ideologies, and where they do this frequently and regularly with some level of transparency and certainty, even though not in outcome, but in terms of processes. Now, so the whole idea of democracy therefore means that people have to elect their leaders, and that is where the nexus between democracy and election is established. So the first and fundamental function of election is that it affords the people the opportunity to select their leaders in an atmosphere of freedom. The second one is that when people elect their leaders in that kind of atmosphere, and it is adjudged to be free and fair, it confers legitimacy on the government that has been put in place. In other words, you don't therefore need to raise issues around who do you represent. The question of representation is therefore settled by that process. But it is also important in a society to have democracy, because what democracy has done for many societies, and particularly for Africa and for Nigeria, is that it is a mechanism of resolving the question of succession. Because this is the only orderly means in which you change leaders. And you know that the contentious nature of leadership change or succession is the major problem of Africa. And if you go back to our own history, our democracy came to grief each time we were in the second election. And that brings clearly into the public domain the major crisis of political succession. Therefore, if a society is able to establish a democratic and electoral process that inspires public confidence, that is trusted by all the parties, and where elections are adjudged to be free and fair or have integrity, you are resolving that problem of political succession. But the problem with democracy, however, is that whereas it has all these intrinsic qualities, it is also a conflict-generating process, particularly for two reasons. One, in a society like Nigeria, where politicians often appeal to differences, religion, ethnicity, clan, in order to harvest votes, you are likely going to trigger those fault lines that can create problems. The second one is where you have a political system that is underlined by a majoritarian system in which everyone wants to win and no one wants to lose. In other words, if you have a zero-sum electoral process in which you don't have any way of rewarding losers or those who are second best, or improving diversity of representation in parliaments, as we have had in the last 20 years, you are going to see a lot of acrimony, you are going to see a lot of contestation, and you are going to see a lot of people resorting to self-help in order to determine outcome of a process that is yet to even, kickstart. So this is where election is. It is about citizenship. In fact, if you go back to the meaning of citizenship, in the real sense of the word, citizenship is about people taking their destiny into their hands. Because as legitimate members of a state, citizens that have election as the instrument of making and unmaking, And so it is that ability of endowing citizens with the capacity to make and unmake, in order to advance accountability, that becomes the real basic need for a society that aspires to be democratic to have very transparent electoral processes in which citizens are guaranteed the opportunity to remove leaders and to, change it as the time comes.
All right, Professor Samegu, thanks a lot. Ezewan Wagu, we're still on the issue of the centrality of elections to democracy. What's your take? I would also like to just introduce this at this point so that we can contextualize it in 20 years of unbroken democracy. Succession management has always been a major challenge. We saw what happened in 1964, 1965, leading to the first coup. We also saw what happened in 1983. And but here we are. We've had 5 elections now conducted by the civilian administrations, not the 1999, not the 1998-99 transition elections that were conducted by the outgoing military regime. So how central are elections, to democracy, and in particular political accounting and legitimacy and succession?
Well, it's clear that election is a competitive enterprise. So what that then means is that the process to separate citizens from subjects is what happens. Subjects don't have a say. And that's the point that Professor Igu made about the monarchical system, the totalitarian system, dictatorship. In that place, citizens have no say in who becomes what and how long that person can stay. You can agitate, but you do not have any say. But here now, you have periodic intervention of citizens in saying, okay, if the Constitution says 4 years in our own case, after every 4 years, you come back. And then that accountability that he talked about is where they either punish you or return you, whichever way they look at it, through a process that is also inclusive. Because inclusivity and absence of discrimination is also what enthrones democracy more than every other part that you are talking about. In this other thing, you have an FRC, PRC, they sit down, decide what the laws are. But in this particular situation, you have seen in these 20 years, you have seen even in the National Assembly that the return rate has gradually been going down at every point because the citizens are indeed saying you can't come back or you have done well. So very few have had to return. So for me, really is that in this engagement, the issue of coming back to the people is what is central. And you talked about the fact that for this after 1998-99, you have had civilian. What has happened is that people are not very quick to agree to that. But the truth is that there has been incremental progress in the institution that drives this process. And through the role of the people, it's not a gift. Because many times we also make that mistake. We don't give ourselves credit that our pushing has also increased the integrity of the process in such a way that, for me, election is becoming more and more, better than what it was. 2003, you remember, 2007, 2011, and in spite of all that, you are having more and more people saying, okay, these issues, even if I feel aggrieved, there is some oversight. There is a level of oversight that is able to stem whatever impunity that has played. And that is what is building that confidence. The courts are becoming episodically, if you like, very, very, strong in saying you didn't do well. And if you see even just the last conducted election, the courts have withdrawn certificates. Many certificates have been withdrawn from people who ordinarily, we have seen the court say, look, you didn't do the right thing, and everybody has come to the point where they understand that even if you do what is wrong, there is still an institution that is able to address that impunity. And I think that is restoring confidence.
All right, thank you. At this point, we have just been joined from our Lagos studio, Honorable Muhammad Kumalia. Honorable Kumalia was a former member of the House of Representatives, and at that period was also a former majority leader, or minority leader, rather. Honorable Muhammad Kumalia, good morning and welcome to the program.
Morning, Kirian.
All right, let's get your opening comment immediately. Professor Igu and Wago have actually made their opening comments concerning Nigeria's democratic process since 1999. But our focus this morning is actually on the electoral process. We have had 5 electoral cycles so far since 1999. And the question that Kingsley put to both of them was actually the centrality of election in a democratic enterprise. Let's get your view.
Well, thank you for having me this morning, and I think this is a very important topic. The elections are central to the democratic process, no doubt about that. And in the last 20 years, Nigeria has had has learned quite a lot in trying to perfect the process. You would agree with me that in 1999, when this system was being introduced, there was a lot of skepticism about whether it was going to be an enduring process. A lot of people didn't even believe in it. And because of that, it came with its challenges, such as people apathy. People didn't come out to vote as much as they ought to. But with time, people began to realize that this process has majorly come to stay. And along the process, there has been ways that have been devised by the key players, especially politicians, of which I'm one, in trying to gain advantage of the system on the one hand. And on the other hand, those saddled with the responsibility of the electoral process, such as the electoral umpire, the security services, and what have you, also trying to perfect the ways and means of ensuring that the system is not flaunted. So that has brought a lot of development in trying to perfect the process. And I believe we're still not there. We have a long way to go. The parties, for instance, when you talk about the electoral process, you have to look at the role of the parties on the one hand, at the beginning, that will lead to what happens at the end of the day in terms of the general elections themselves. The parties have had their ups and downs. Their processes and procedures have been challenged variously, the way and manner they do things. In the recent elections, we have seen cases where some parties did not follow their own rules and regulations. The courts have intervened on many occasions to say that you cannot make rules and abandon the rules midway. That members of your parties have rights because they are subjected to those rules that you set. And therefore, as a political party, you cannot set your rules and then midway you come and flout the rules. That is as far as the parties are concerned. And this courts, several courts from the tribunal up to the Supreme Court have made pronouncements regarding the need for parties to adhere to their rules. That's part of perfecting the electoral process. In 2015, when the idea of electronic voting, or card reader as it were, was first introduced, I think a lot of the key players that are used to a particular system of flaunting the process, the politicians and their co-travelers, so to speak, found it a bit strange, and that held them back. And because of that, in 2015, there was a lot of credibility in the electoral process, as opposed to what had happened previously. Now, which also tells us that the introduction of technology into the process that started around 2015 has had its positive impact in trying to streamline the process and ensuring that the outcome of the process had some level and degree of integrity, and that people could respect it. If you remember, the former president, Goodluck Jonathan, that lost the 2015 elections, picked up his phone and congratulated the winner. Why? Because perhaps from the evidence available to him and members of his party, it was obvious that that election had some level of credibility, and that perhaps there was no point in trying to drag the process by perhaps filing a petition at the courts and what have you. And therefore, we have seen a level of maturity and progress to the extent that a president who has lost an election could pick up his phone and call the winner and say, "Congratulations, Your Excellency, you have won this election, and I congratulate you." So, you see, that means that progressively, gradually, the process is getting more and more trusted by the people. But be that as it may, as I said earlier, we still have a long way to go. The 2019 general elections ought to have enjoyed perhaps a better degree of the use of technology. But unfortunately, as I'm sure all of us are aware, the amendment to the Electoral Act that ought to introduce some of these things came at a time that was found to be suspicious, and the amendment to the laws to the Electoral Act was done so lately in the day that preparations had gone very far, and it had done a lot, and therefore to reverse some of these steps that have been taken and to include some of the proposals made by the National Assembly into the Electoral Act was found to be coming too late, and therefore not much of what was expected went into that law. But hopefully, this 9th National Assembly that is coming, one would expect is a situation whereby early in the day, the Electoral Act could be looked at, and indeed, the reason that was given by the President for not signing the amended Electoral Act was because of the reasons I've stated. And therefore, timing is key and essential in trying to build confidence. You see, the electoral process is a process that has to do with perception, confidence building of the electorate, of the key players. And once an action is taken in a manner that seeks to show that it is premeditated, it is skewed to gaining a certain advantage by a certain group of people, then that credibility will be lost. And therefore, it is essential that the process needs to start early. The amendments to the Electoral Act, the introduction of electronic systems and platforms and ways and means into the process should be done early enough, and that would improve on the ease of elections themselves. It will impact.
All right, Honorable Kumala, thank you very much. We'll return to you in our Lagos Network studios. Let's come back to our guest here with us in the studios. Professor Sam Egu, of course, while in a sense extolling what would be the virtues of the electoral process since 1999, notwithstanding the challenges, it's useful for us to have a better understanding or a deeper understanding by going back into history, to therefore appreciate what has been, if you like, the staying power of the electoral process since 1999. And why is this relevant? Again, during the First Republic, the federal and regional elections of 1964 and 1965 had all the ingredients of violence. And Operation Wet Tear that you had in the Southwest and so on and so forth. Then the Republic collapsed. In the Second Republic, we also saw what happened, massive manipulation of the election, and then attendant violence, and then the Republic got sacked. Since 1999, we have also had instances of, wanton manipulation of the electoral process, plus violence. But the Republic has endured. What, therefore, is the staying power arising from the electoral process, as we have seen?
Well, I think that's a very, very pungent question that requires some reflection. I think between the first, second, and perhaps third republics on the one hand, and the Fourth Republic, I think we have seen a lot of structural changes. Changes in the political structure of the country that has impacted on the character of political institutions. I'll give one example. You had competing regionalism in the First Republic. Over the years, that has been whittled down significantly by creation of new states. In the First and Second Republic, you have political parties that were obviously regional and ethnic in outlook, even in terms of philosophy. And they did it, they were not ashamed of that, because that was the nature of that was the way in which the elites, the political elites itself was structured. And that was what framed their approach to power. We don't have that. In 1979, we had a major departure, in our constitutional engineering, where, for example, we made provisions that were only interested in parties that are national in outlook. And so we don't have sectarian, we don't have ethnic parties, but that does not mean we don't have parties whose electoral base reflects that or that have those tendencies. But the fact that we have had major parties that are national in outlook, you know, intervening in the political process and also with mechanisms of inclusion, you know, has changed the dynamics of politics in this country. Let me say something, for example. Like the NPN of the Second Republic, the PDP in the Fourth Republic came with zoning principle. And you know, it was the violation or lack of faithfully implementing that zoning that caused the problem for the party. But the adoption of zoning itself was a very important mechanism for managing diversity. So you can see the context is changing. But more importantly, I think what we have seen since 1999 that changed the entire outcome is that, one, we've had citizens' engagement. And I think it's one of the major issues in this country. You have citizens emerging as election observers, even though they are not monitors, but effectively what they have done, you know, amounted to monitoring that process and rendering it open. We have seen also the rise of the legislature. It was not what it was in 1999. If you look at the National Assembly, I'm not going to speak about what the situation is at the subnational level, but you are beginning to see some modicum of institutional development of the legislature arising from a combination of factors. For example, the regularity of elections. You know, we have had, this is the sixth, we did it for the sixth successive time. We've never had that type of opportunity. And so the quality of people coming up in the National Assembly is on the increase. You have pro-reform elements that are emerging on their own to say we're a good governance group, and sometimes ignoring their own party, you know, to select their leadership, you know. So you have a lot of things going, and there's a lot of international engagement. I mean, one of the major things that I have found in this country, I mean, in our electoral process since 1999, is that Nigeria's foreign friends, development partners, and donors have come to realize that this is a regional power, and that if you strengthen democratic processes and institutions in Nigeria, it can have a snowballing effect on the region. They are also scared about the possibility of things going wrong and the consequence of that for the region. So the level of engagement, the UN level, the level of, you know, bilateral organizations like the EU, many of them that have funded activities related to democratic elections, you know, strengthening political parties, strengthening civil society, strengthening parliament, and even strengthening engagement between citizens and their leaders. And I think there's a point to keep making, you know, which is the point I want to really finish on. And that is that by the nature of the Nigerian society, by the nature of our diversity, by the nature of our political elite, we like democracy. Nigeria is an inherently democratic society. And that is why we are also very federal in nature. And you know that the relationship between federalism and democracy is a very strong one, because it's also about diversity. So we have mechanisms for expressing diversity, and we are very resilient people. We may have done things not well, you know, but majority of Nigerians, and we must give credit to them, believe in democracy, believe in being properly governed, believe in subjecting their leaders to accountability, and believe that if they have their way, they can actually insist on what is fair to everybody. So that is the staying power, the resilience of the Nigerian people, their interest to sustain democracy. And that is why you can't have the kind of dictators you have had in many other parts of Africa, in this country. Even at the height of their power, military dictators in this country were forced to abdicate, you know, and to understand that this country is not a society that you can treat like Malawi, that you can treat like Liberia. You know, so there's that recognition of the innate qualities of the democratic disposition of the Nigerian people, and I think these are the things that we need to look at.
It would be right to say that we're no longer a nascent democracy in terms of experiences over the years, in terms of positive achievements that you have outlined, you know, using several factors, you know, to explain. Now, let's return to the electoral process, because after all said and done, Prof, there's something you said earlier on concerning the integrity of governance. You also talked about elections enforce accountability, which is lacking majorly in governance in Nigeria, not just at the national level, but at sub-national level as well. Now, let us return to elections. Honorable Kumalia raised one pertinent issue that concerns the Electoral Act. And we have had one or two electoral acts or reforms, as the case may be, but the president, during the last election, did not sign the reformed Electoral Act, you know, which many Nigerians believe was part of the reason why we had cantankerous kind of election where we recorded violence almost in all parts of the country. Even with the level of education we have politically, we're still finding it difficult to handle electoral process. As you've been there in the field for some years now. Please give us a perspective as to why is it that we don't obey electoral laws and regulations during elections?
Well, I think that subliminally has been addressed in some sense, but I think that we make a fetish of, you know, electoral amendments. The Electoral Act is the most amended piece of legislation since 1999. And that many times people, up to 2015, we amended that Electoral Act. And even those who amended it did not eventually know that it was signed into law on March 2015. So anytime people come with this, if you amend if that Electoral Act was amended, many times what you even need to do is to ask people that what is in that thing, what is in this new one that will have made fundamental and significant difference in the quality of the election, in issue around internal party democracy, which is what we are dealing with. The outcome of the indiscipline within the political parties is what has colored most of the engagements that we have seen. Not really the election proper. So the attitude of the political class, we've overrated them in such a way that we are not interested. In fact, we over-respect them. We are not interested in oversighting their activities in the same manner in which we oversight the activities of even the electoral management body. The incremental progress that we have seen in the electoral management body is as a result of consistent oversight by citizen groups, ensuring that things are getting better. Even if they are not, you keep pushing. But we allow the politicians to drive the narrative. So what then happens? And I keep asking myself, I said, look, the law is there about overvoting. For instance, if you overvote, there are consequences for overvoting. The politicians know that law. So what you have had in time past is when you overvote, they say, okay, let's go to court. Go to court and resolve it. Now, when you have the electoral management body get to that point where we have pushed it to punish that electoral malfeasance, then the outcome, the shout about it is reverberates round first about the integrity of the election, directed by the politicians who are determining for you whether the electoral management body should regulate them or not. So for me is that if you talk about violence, the political class are implicated in the violence that you see, not because of the absence of a level playing ground. This guy wants to win at all costs. He wants to break the law and insists that nothing happens in the process of breaking that law. So, for me, the bigger question would be to say, what are we doing with engaging the political class and their political parties and making sure that they act responsibly in such a way that their attitude and actions eventually bring clean election that we are all looking for. In terms of what has happened within the process, we know that it is possible for you to have elements within the EMB that are created in the image of the politicians. You know, that is understandable. But that does not resolve the fact that institutional mechanism for behaving well is what has led to some of the things that we have seen in this election. For the first time, we are seeing the electoral management body coming out before the courts came out and say you can't behave in this manner. And the courts, the Supreme Court upheld that position. And I can't but be excited about that kind of regulator. I've seen the electoral management body say, look, your behavior, you can't win in this manner. I can't give you certificate. If you want to get my certificate, go to court, and if the court says I should give you, I give you. It doesn't happen before. What will have happened is that take your certificate, then go and but more and more, we have seen electoral management body get strengthened. But we are not getting the same attitude in oversighting, and I keep making that point, subnational elections.
Yeah, we will come to subnational elections in 20 years, if we have had any. If we have very few of them, by the way, let's acknowledge that. That's to say, the conduct of local government elections by state independent electoral commissions. Again, I mean, having taken on the point that Kieran raised, I would like you to comment on what Professor Sam Egu said in talking about the source or sources of the staying power of the Fourth Republic on account of the electoral process, notwithstanding the many challenges that we've had. It referenced the intervention of development partners as well as other international institutions. In your opinion, has this been well worth it?
Well, I think for me it's the robust nature of the engagement by civil society. Many times not even donor-driven. The actions, the level of donor intervention is appreciable. But the ability of Nigerians themselves, Nigerian civil society, to engage the system has produced that staying power that you talk about. You just name it. And when you say elections are getting better, it took a protest to take out the chairman of electoral management body that had his term. That had his term ongoing. The civil society mobilized and said, look, the kind of election that you conducted in 2007, you cannot continue. That didn't get donor. It wasn't donor funded. It was citizen action. So robust citizen engagement has been the staying power for this democracy.
But for either, that's to say, the election management body now to behave the way it is doing, just as you have indicated, with regard to what we saw in 2019, to say, hey, listen, you can't do this because, you didn't comply with the rules. Yes. And upon judicial review, the position of the electoral management body was also upheld. The electoral management body itself has been undergoing some purification.
Sure. It's a self-cleansing ocean. As far as I'm concerned, INEC is a self-cleansing ocean. After the debacle of the first March election, you saw an EMB that had to, on daily basis, if any public institution behaves in that manner, on daily basis, was throwing out the challenges where they are at every point in time. It didn't come like as a gift. It was a condition that, look, this logistics nightmare that we saw, you can't sweep it under the carpet. Citizens rose up, and then you got, both at the state level, Professor Egu and his colleagues were mandated to have engagement with citizens and bring them up to scratch on issues that. So for me is to say, look, democracy is robust with citizen oversight. If we take that out, the ability of citizens to question and knock doors and demand answers. You had, prior to the election, you had the EMB addressing the press periodically. Now, information is very important. The ability of citizens to be aware. Now, that institution came to the people in their constituencies, the political parties were part of the guidelines. So it was not a situation in which you made a guideline and you forced it on people. The guidelines were made available to civil society, to the media, and to the political parties to make input. That brings confidence. That stultifies the ability to criticize. Because if you are part of a process that brought out you will only be grandstanding if you criticize what you are eventually part of. So, for me, the underlying staying power for democracy, whether here or elsewhere, will be citizen oversight and engagement.
At this point, we would like to also get Honorable Muhammad Kumail's view on this. What is that underlying staying power for you? The nation has lasted for 20 years of democratic governance. So what's your own view? You have been at the National Assembly and you have also networked among other politicians across the nation. So what is the major staying power of our democracy 20 years after?
Well, thank you. I think just to build upon what Ezenwa has said, I think part of it is one that Nigerians have realized that this is the kind of democracy is the system that gives them opportunity to participate in the process. And therefore, with all the fault lines, with all the problems, attendant problems that the system has, it is still the only system that gives citizens the opportunity to participate. And therefore, to that extent, there is a general consensus amongst the populace that democracy gives opportunity for citizens to participate in the process, for them to elect their leaders, and to reject leaders that have not done well, as we have seen in many elections in recent past, including the last general elections. That is one. Secondly, the options are really, there are no options, so to speak. Other manners of governance, such as military rule and what have you, have gradually gone out of fashion. And because of the strategic place of Nigeria in Africa and the world at large, it is believed, and rightly so, that whatever affects Nigeria has a tendency of affecting, countries around it and beyond. And therefore, I think there is a realization from amongst, leaders, both, in the international community and from Nigerians, that Nigeria needed a very stable system of government or governance. And the only stable system of governance that could give that reassurance is democracy. And therefore, this is a very major factor. And that's why you see a lot of engagement of, development partners, members of the international community in giving support to the process. INEC is one of the major beneficiaries of the support from members of the international community, from, development partners in terms of helping them to fine-tune their processes, to ensure that they have the capacity in terms of training and what have you, for them to be able to deliver on their mandate in a more efficient and effective manner. So that is why a lot of these, international agencies and partners support the process. Even the National Assembly, I remember, when I was there, and I believe it still continues, the National Democratic Institute, NDI, and the IRI are two major vehicles, American-based, agencies that help in, strengthening the democratic process. And to that extent, in the National Assembly, when I was minority leader, we had a lot of engagements with them, trying to, train legislators, trying to invite them to come and see the best practices in terms of democracy and what democracy holds or promises. And to that extent, there has been a lot of capacity building with regards to, the way and manner, for instance, the parliament should function. There's a lot of support and capacity building at the way and manner the electoral, body should function. And of course, like everyone said, the civil society has always also been very helpful in the process. And to that extent, they have been holding the electoral umpire and what have you, to account on some of the things and that needs to be improved upon, and so on and so forth. But basically, there are no options, and it gives opportunity, give and take. I think this is the system that has enjoyed consensus from amongst both national and international players, that it is the best system that promises the delivery of good governance to the people. And to a large extent, in spite of all the shortcomings of the system, this system has done a lot.
All right. Honorable Kumaila, thank you very much there for your comments from our Lagos Network Center. We still have you and, of course, the other guests. We're taking a short break now. When we return, we'll continue with the conversation, and we also take the tweets that have come in from our viewers.
One Football Confederation, 24 teams, 6 stadiums, 4 cities, 504 African stars, 1 trophy. The Africa Cup of Nations Egypt 2019 comes alive from June 21 with the showpiece final on July 19, 2019. Watch the 52 matches of the tournament live on Africa's biggest and largest television network, NTA, in partnership with Hot Sports. Be part of the biggest soccer fiesta in the African continent as the Super Eagles go on a bold mission to clinch the prestigious title for the 4th time, to the excitement of millions of fans across the length and breadth of Nigeria. For inquiries, please contact Abubakar on 0803-331-0175 and Felix on 0803-308-2375. NTA, you can't beat the rich.
Chief. Good morning, sir. You are here already?
No, now my spirit day, my body day for house. What kind of question is that? Were you not the one that fixed this meeting for 8 a.m.? You are now coming by 10 a.m. and start asking me jab questions.
But Chief, now, I'm sorry. Don't you also go late for meetings sometimes? You know now, African time.
No more African time. And no more pancaking of face during office hours. At the end of the day, we will lose valuable time. We will not make progress. If we want to move this nation forward, we must treat business as business and respect time. Change begins with me.
Thank you, sir. I am sorry. Can we go for the meeting now, Chief?
Later.
This message is brought to you by the National Orientation Agency in conjunction with the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
All right, welcome back. And it's still Good Morning Nigeria, reaching you live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. Now, let's take the tweets that have come in. We have this first one from Jimmy T. Martins. My dad had told me how electoral processes were in the past, that election rigging was easily done. But for 2015 and 2019 elections that I worked as an ad hoc staff, I can confidently say that election results were not manipulated in my polling units because there are possible ways of resisting rigging at polling units. Okay.
Yeah, but it didn't. There's one line there.
All right, it says, what I don't know is what happens outside the polling units that politicians still complain. I believe that INEC has a lot to do at post-polling unit processes. Summarily, he says, we are right on track.
Of course, he made a very good point there, because outside the polling unit, what happens? Right, the law Alpha C says the electoral processes have fared better compared to the exigencies of the past. INEC has can be said to be truly independent, but more needs to be done to solidify transparency and fortify the democratic institutions.
Now, Danladi Ndayebo, the biggest challenge confronting us is the inability of politicians to resist the temptation to use religion, ethnicity, or even deploy thugs during elections. We must imbibe the need to focus on issue-related platforms to sway potential voters.
And Mohammed Issa Abdullahi, INEC and other stakeholders most often come up with a well-articulated electoral process, but got sabotaged along the line majorly by politicians, irrespective of political parties, who always come up with ways of manipulating the system to their advantages with any slightest privilege.
Sani Michael Amakoji. Now, the introduction of card reader was a well-thought-out idea, but by now, card readers should have been linked to our BVN and national ID to make electoral fraud difficult and also reduce electoral violence. We should fully deploy ICT into our system.
Cecilia Okoroma, if political gladiators were of sentiments of tribe, be it Igbo, Yoruba, Hausa, party syndrome, our democratic process will do well.
Mutana Farouk, the electoral process in Nigeria deserves accolades. Now, past and present administrations must be praised for their efforts in sanitizing the process. I urge INEC and other stakeholders to consolidate the existing structures. Those are the tweets that we're taking in the meantime. Kyria, there's an aspect, if you don't mind, there's an aspect I would like to bring in here. Of course, we can throw in, we all know there are persisting challenges, vote buying, violence, and so on and so forth. Those are, shall we say, workaday issues. But here is a catch. What has happened in the Fourth Republic would appear to be what some persons will refer to as excessive judicial review. In other words, excessive litigation arising from elections. Whereas in the past we could speak of general elections, now the language has changed. We now talk of cycle of elections, bearing in mind that there are off-season or off-cycle elections. So that, for instance, Kyria, we have 7 governors whose elections, were not part of what we had in 2019. I mean, those states are very well known: Osun, Ondo, Ekiti, Edo, Anambra, Kogi, and Bayelsa, on account, of course, from litigation. And one notable point in the litigation of election that we have seen is the onerous proof of rigging that is imposed on a petitioner. So that, yes, fine, the electoral process may be improving, but without having, as it were, a transition to the courts, where the courts have now become, as it were, very active in determining electoral outcomes. Professor Samegu, what is your thought about this? And how do we back off from this apparent, in some persons' views, excessive judicial review of our elections?
And in addition to that, Prof, the just concluded elections, of course, many results have been obtained, right. Very many of them.
No, I think 20 years down the line, when probably the system would have improved beyond what it is, the fact that we have staggered elections or off-season election will continue to remind Nigerians that we're coming from a past of electoral impunity. So people will then ask, how come that these 7 states are not part of general? Oh, they said, oh yes, this is the history. So, and I think we need that history, so it's very important. I think the real question is this: how come that courts are making very important, significant interventions in place of citizens? And it is something to ponder on. My own response would be that the courts are actually taking over the space that has been provided by the irresponsibility of members of the political class. And I think that's the logical outcome of that. Remember, from 1999, the courts were reluctant to even get involved in internal disputes of political parties. I think it was sometime in 2007 that the Supreme Court woke up one day and said, look, political parties are public institutions. They are governed by law. They are also governed by their own constitutions. If they fail to uphold their own rule, the courts have the right, to help them enforce their own rule. So, and I think that for me became the point of departure. So in Amechi's case, it was the court that did not say, look, he was the real candidate of the party. Said, swear him in. We are discussing Zamfara. The citizens have voted for a particular party. The courts have said, well, you didn't do your things well. The party that actually didn't receive the maximum of the votes, you are the winner, you know. So it is a travesty of democracy that people who didn't receive votes are going to rule. But what is the problem? The problem is that politicians are not obeying their own rules, you know. So I think the major lesson to learn is that the courts will reduce their level of intervention if we did our job very well as politicians. Remember that more often than not, you have so many number of pre-election cases that people vote on election day without knowing who the real candidates are. It's not healthy for democracy. So I think we need to shift our focus, you know, to the actors themselves and to put the burden on them to behave well. Because democracy is not a divine gift from God. It is a combination of institutional capacity and behavior of people who obey their own rules.
All right, Honorable Kumale, I hope you're still there and you've listened to Professor Egu on this very issue. What will be your final thought on this particular conversation is your own view on this particular issue of judicial pronouncements on results of elections that actually distorted the timetable of election in some states?
I think I can say that the intervention of the courts in the electoral process is absolutely necessary in the process of perfecting the democratic process, or the electoral process. Laws are made. These laws need to be tested. And once you test the laws, definitely you must have the courts to interpret whether, you know, they have been implemented the right or the wrong way. And here, let me compartmentalize it into two categories. You have what, you know, is being referred to as the pre-election matters. And then you have the electoral, you know, petitions, as it were, those actions that go to court after the elections have held. All pre-election matters deal with issues that have happened between members of political parties and their political parties. That is in terms of whether there has been a disrespect of internal rules and regulations of the party, you know, by either members or the party itself. And like Professor Sam said, the parties at a certain point in time felt, and indeed the courts have helped initially, talking about shying away, you know, and helped the party, emboldened the parties to feel that, yes, it's their party, it's their internal, affair, and therefore they can do whatever they want to do. But gradually, the courts felt the level of impunity was getting too much. It's going to affect the integrity of the electoral process. And therefore, they intervened and said, look, once you make rules and regulations, you must abide by it. The members have a responsibility to abide by the rules you said. And therefore, conversely, you know, you must also be able to respect these rules in relation to the rights of your members. So that is on the one hand. And even the issue of Zamfara, we're talking about now, is a matter that was brought about by a pre-election matter. The issue of Amechi was a pre-election matter. So that is to tell you the importance of what happens before the election itself. The second aspect is what happens after the elections. Whether somebody was qualified to, before he ran for an office, or in fact, if you remember, sometime around 2007, or before 2007, the electoral empire had the right to disqualify a candidate that has been fielded by a party. And it took the intervention of the Supreme Court in the case of Atiku, you know, against, I think, the PDP or whatever, to say that, you know, the electoral empire has no power to disqualify a candidate. The process of getting a candidate is, the responsibility is that of a party. If you bring a candidate that is not qualified, and the courts eventually say he's not qualified, you stand to lose that election. So you're going to pay for not doing your due diligence in terms of screening your members and ensuring that they have the qualification to contest for that office based on the prerequisites that have been set by the Constitution of the country in terms of qualification. So we have evolved, and it will continue, the courts will continue to intervene, because just like the electoral umpire is trying to, sharpen its processes, its systems, procedures, and so on, the courts would guide and try to tamper and try to adjust, and for us to be able to get it right. So in the next couple of years, I see the high intervention of the courts in the process. But as it matures, as the electoral system and processes gets,
Honorable Mohammed Kumalia, well, sorry we tended to have lost you there, but we'd like to thank you for your contributions to our discussion this morning. You joined us from our Lagos Network studios. Honorable Kumala is a former minority leader of the House of Representatives. Once again, thank you for your insights. Let's very quickly return to Ezewa Nwagu here in the studios. Ezewa Nwagu, the issue on the table, your thoughts with regard to judicial intrusion into the electoral process, which has been very significant since 1999.
Well, I think it's clearly stated that what we have had is that if the politicians behave in a certain way, there should be somebody who knocks them back to shape, and the court is vested with the power to do so. If there are no misbehavior on the part of the politicians, there is no other place to resolve. They can't be allowed to resort to self-help, so they must go to somewhere. The outcome of that, and the beauty of it is that there are stages, so you can take that matter from one point to the other until it gets to the final arbiter. But we need to deal with the challenge, because sometimes when we also talk about internal party democracy, where we also don't see the meddlesomeness of chief executives, whether at the federal level or at the states, who have appropriated the position of leader of the party to themselves, and determining who gets what within those political parties. The governors in many states will buy forms and share to people and say, you go and run for this, you go and run for this, and bankroll them.
Yeah, we talked about that yesterday in parentheses, referring to the imperious powers.
No, that's what I'm saying. But you also will remember very clearly that one of the inglorious contributions of President Obasanjo really in our party system is the ambush of the party administration. By his administration, determining very clearly
who runs what, determining who runs what.
Yes, the chairman of the party, he can wake up in the morning, invite them for and then ask them to resign. And we accepted those things, and many people who took over decided that becomes the norm. So in the local governments, you have the chairman of the party, you have the chairman of the local government who appropriates that he's now the leader of the party, and not the chairman of the party in the state.
Prof,
so party structures is what you're talking about.
Prof, very, very briefly, give us an idea of what you've observed with respect to subnational elections.
No, I think the story is very clear that subnational elections, that is elections conducted by the state independent electoral commissions, do not enjoy the same level of public confidence and integrity like the one conducted by INEC. And this has given rise to debates. Some say scrap the state independent electoral commission. Some say leave them because we are federal in nature. And I think the basic point to learn is that the evidence, they are not doing very well, and you need to subject them to the same logic of reform that INEC has been subjected to at the national level, in terms of the independence of those who are members, in terms of funding, and exposing them to reform measures. If we do that, I'm sure they can learn lessons.
All right, it's on that note, we'd like to thank Sam Ego, Professor of Political Science and Resident Electoral Commissioner of INEC in Niger State. Professor Sam Ego, always a delight having you on Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you, Kinsley.
We also would like to appreciate another of our regular guests, Ezenwa Wango, Chairman and Partners for Electoral Reform. Ezenwa, pleasure having you always on Good Morning Nigeria. Okay, now let's go over to one of our complimentary segments. That's the foreign.
7 influential United States senators have expressed intention to force congressional votes on 22 resolutions that would block President Donald Trump's recently announced sales of U.S. weapons to
Following the signing of the young talents, Rema and Crayon, Marvin Record has come through with a new banging video for their hit single titled All Is In